guys, and welcome back to another episode of Digital Artcast. Thanks for tuning in again, and I hope you guys are staying safe and creative wherever you are. I hope you've enjoyed the format the last couple of weeks, the podcast guests that we've been bringing on, and things we've been talking about. A lot of great subject matter from recruiting to game development, and of course, always traditionally art is something we focused on for many, many years now. Also recently, just as of this month, I kind of came off my LinkedIn by accident, but I'm now celebrating 8 years doing the podcast. So from 2016 till now, we've got to talk to some incredible people, really, amazing guests, from Ian McCaig last year, Scott Robertson, guys like that. We've had everybody on we can really think of at this point. So I'm running out of ideas, but every now and again we get a gem that comes on, and we've got a really great guest on today. I think someone that a lot of people have really kind of either asked for or I've kind of seen in the mix that has been on other podcasts. I thought I really want to get on here. So today we're talking to art director, artist, production designer, Jason Scheier. Hey Jason, how's it going?
Hey, going really well, Gordon. Really honored to be here. I love what you're doing with this podcast, and when I saw you had mutual friends and had interviewed other production designer, art directors, and concept designers in our industry, and I love what you were talking about. There's a lot of great topics here and very pertinent / relevant topics that I can get down with. So yeah. I'm stoked about that to be here. So did you want me to just talk a little bit about who I am and
yeah. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know you right at this point.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been working in animation specifically for the past 17 years. And overall, in terms of design and being a concept artist, I've been doing that for 20. And I started off as an illustrator and traditional artist, like most of us do, doing all the pen and ink and foundational design and drawing. And I actually have a fine arts background, and then the fine arts transitioned into traditional foundation illustration. Yep. And I'm not even going to go into the background of all the schools because I kind of hid in school. That's my main. My parents are both in medicine. Okay. My mom is a nurse, and she's been in nursing for almost 50 years now, 60 years.
Wow.
And she's been a nurse since she was 18. And she's turning 75. So she's getting up there, and she still works. So it's kind of amazing. My parents are hard workers. My dad's still a doctor, and he's a general practice doctor, right? And was an OBGYN during the 80s into the 90s. Okay. And so I was always around biology and human sciences, and all those little elements of just design kind of came from those natural curiosities of seeing my parents do that kind of work. Right. And it's interesting because they were never, hey, you can't do art. Like, you should pick up the pen and draw. My mom was always encouraging me to draw and to look at things around me and sort of observe and, do those things. So those things were always embedded in my DNA per se. Yeah. I have an identical twin brother. That's not a lot of people know that about me is my twin brother and I, we're only 1 minute apart, and he's an anesthesia nurse. So he actually does nurse anesthetist.
Yeah. Interesting. So cool. Your whole family basically is in medicine. You're kind of I say the black sheep of the family, but you went and done your own thing. Basically, you found your own path.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I didn't know if I wanted to do art as a full-time job either. I went to school for biology, thinking I was going to go into medicine as well. Right. And I always found myself drawing these really detailed notes, almost like breakdowns of the body while I was in class. Right. Yeah. And one of my teachers was walking around, and this was back in high school. Yeah. She's like, what is that? You're in human science, but you're breaking down the head and the design of the head, the eyeballs and the irises and the pupils and how everything interconnects to the brain. And
oh wow, yeah.
She's like, this is medical. This is medical illustration
stuff.
Yeah. You should do something with this. And she told me to go to Art Center. Right. And I was like, oh, I don't know what Art Center is. So I started doing research, and it seemed very intimidating because I had lived in Orange County my entire life, and LA was a world away. It was over an hour away from wherever I lived. I had never been there. So I said, you know what, one of these weekends when I get my car, I was still, I think 14 at the time. She's like, I encourage you to drive up there and just kind of see it and check it out. Right. And I remember driving up there and meeting Scott Robertson. This was very early when he just became the chair of entertainment design. And this is in the, the
early days of his career in there. Yeah.
Early days there. So it was just neat to see that. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kind of floated around in different schools for a little while. I went to the Art Institute of California, Orange County, got my bachelor's degree there.
Mhm.
graduated with honors, studied animation actually,
Yeah.
and I have a character animation background. I can animate in 3D. I can animate in 2D.
Right.
I could do storyboards.
Mhm.
I worked on short projects there a lot with friends, and actually, a lot of the friends I made in that school became lifelong mates, like Anthony AJ Jones, Android Jones,
Yeah.
and like all my really amazing friends, like Kalen Chalk, and
Mhm.
good buddies of mine, like Jonathan Ryder, who went on to be an art director at Blizzard. His brother
Yeah.
is an art director at Blizzard.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my friends sort of stayed in the business, and I
Mhm.
wasn't getting a job. Like right out of school, I was unhirable because I was sort of a generalist,
Right.
and I didn't know how to build a book yet. And so I just like said, "Here's my 3D animation reel.
Mhm.
Hire me." And I sent it to Blizzard. I sent it to Obsidian,
Mhm.
Bethesda, like all these game studios, because that's what was around me.
Was Game
And
Studios. Yeah.
nobody wanted to talk to me. It was the weirdest thing. So I was like,
Yeah.
"All right, I got to find a job." So I was the kind of person where I can't sit idle. So
Yeah.
I kept working on my portfolio for a year after I graduated
Yeah.
and got really serious. And I remember going to Art Center, back to
Mhm.
Art Center, and Scott's like, "Hey, you should come, do something here." So I actually started taking night classes there
Mhm.
and studying at Art Center, and that was the best thing I ever did because my foundation all kind of came back,
Right.
and I got really serious about concept art.
Mhm.
And I had a teacher back at the Art Institute named Carlo Arliano,
Okay.
and Carlo was sort of the guy who really set me in motion, like put my comet into orbit.
Mhm.
And he was like, "Hey, dude, like you should be doing art and design for film or art and design for games."
Yeah.
And he was just so strong at like conceptual character design and like
Mhm.
object design and environment design. And he had a very well-rounded background. And that person was the sort of instrumental in getting me to go and be, more serious about what I was doing. And I never looked back. I worked in games for a little while. I got hired by a friend that felt bad for me. He's like, "Hey, dude, I'm like sitting here at this I was at a consulting service trying to like refinance homes. That's what I was doing.
Right.
And I got this call, and he's like, "Hey, man, they got this junior concept artist position.
Mhm.
It's at Shiny Entertainment. We're about to merge with the collective, and we're going to make our own thing. Hey, you want to come over and do some games with us?" And we're doing movie games. And I got hired under a lead artist named Sean O'Daniels, who's an amazing artist. He's a great illustrator. And we
Yep.
shared an office together, and he was wonderful. He was like very open with me and sort of shared all of his knowledge and techniques and whatnot. And I was like, "Crap, this is awesome. Like I'm learning how to like do concept art for games here." And
Mhm.
I worked on the Justice League video game. I worked on
Oh.
I think they just finished Golden Compass. They
Right.
did the Matrix there. They did Earthworm Jim there, which is actually really cool. Under
All
Duck
time favorite characters. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
all these amazing games. And there's just such the collective, those guys were like the serious group that's
Right.
merged with the shiny guys.
Yeah.
And the shiny guys were like, "Hey, they like animation, they like quirky stuff."
Mhm.
And it was like the best environment to be in. I was only there for like 6 months, but it
Right.
was the best 6 months of my life because I was such a sponge. I was
Did
soaking
absorb.
up all this like great info from both sides, and it was just
Yep.
like this perfect amalgamation and alchemy
Mhm.
happening under that same roof.
Yep.
And then, have you ever heard of Seagraph before?
Yes. Yes. Yep. The event that happens yearly, I think, at this point now. But yeah. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So Seagraph is like about emerging technologies,
Mhm.
and they always have a really great job fair there. For people that are looking for jobs, I highly encourage checking it out
Yeah.
because all the major studios come there, and when they go to Seagraph, they're looking to hire people. It's not like a normal convention because they know that like us, the nerds, are going to be there,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have like a serious, affirmation to get a job in a specific field.
Yep. Yep.
So I brought my book with me. I had this like physical portfolio, and I gave it to DreamWorks Animation
Mhm.
because I've always wanted to work there. I saw Prince of Egypt, and I
Oh yeah.
saw like these beautiful background paintings that were done traditionally in 2D, and I said, "That's what I want to do." If
Yeah.
there's some way to bust into that, and it was like the works of Paul Lassane and Derek Gogol and
Right.
Lorenzo Martinez and all these amazing layout artists and
Yep.
Marcos Mateo. And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
like a weirdo. Like I study the background. Like if I see a background, I'm like, I like that background. I'm gonna find out who that is,
Right.
and I'll like go the kind of reverse engineer the look and
Yeah.
see who those people are.
Yep.
And you have to put in that effort, man. Like if you want to work in a field, you have to sort of dissect and sort of understand who and what and where and how all those like
I do
ideas
that
came
with so
together.
much stuff. People think I'm such a nerd sometimes, Jason, where the fact that like I can literally look at a painting and be like, "Oh, that's Max Davenport," or "That's Matt Gazer," or "That's like." People are like, "How the
Amazing.
fuck do you know that?" I'm like, "Just you can see it in their style." It's like my eye is so well trained for that stuff. Yeah.
You have to, and I think that as a production designer now that I'm skipping forward.
Yeah.
Uh, you have to be a fan of the people you hire
Yeah.
too.
Yep.
And I never was in a position to hire as I was a junior artist.
Hmm.
I really truly worked the ranks. Like I went
Yep.
from super junior to like very intermediate journeyman and
Right.
to a layout background supervisor and then
Yeah.
to production design art direction,
Yeah. I
And
mean,
that was
that's I was going to say that's just like a thing that I think with this industry, if you're driven enough and you're good enough, like you can rocket really really quickly up the ranks.
you can. And I didn't feel ready. And I've had opportunities in the past. I was working on Smallfoot actually, just jumping forward to Warner Animation Group.
Hmm.
And a good friend of mine approached me. And funny you mentioned this. There was a
Hmm.
movie with Ian McKegg, and
Right.
he was the producer and the director on it.
Oh wow.
And he's like, "Hey, I need a production designer. Will you come work with me?" And I actually went to the Sony lot,
Hmm.
and I was ready to do it, and the project got shut down.
Oh.
So
But what
there's
an
like
honor though for Ian to ask you, because I mean Ian, you know what I mean, like at this
yeah,
point, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
He's
it
an
was kind
absolute
of
legend.
amazing in itself.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
like even the fact that you're doing production design now, because I think sometimes people can work their whole careers and never even get that job because it's such a high level job because you're obviously setting the tone for like everything that's been seen.
yes, and
Yeah.
it's a weird job too because it's such a thankless task in a lot of ways. It's
Art in general is a thankless task.
it's it's
Yeah.
it's so hard, and
Yep.
it's crazy because there's so many things nobody talks about
Yeah.
that are like there's the painful side of it where you're trying to have these conversations sometimes with people that are less motivated to make things awesome, and
Right.
they're just like, hey, here's the money, like figure it out,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
attitude. Where other people are like, hey, I want to be creative with you, I get jacked on art and I'm really excited about learning and working with you. And
Yeah.
there's just so many different types of people, and I think that having those human skills in the past, working in a consultancy and
Yep.
in loans and working in a medical background, you
Mhm.
get people that are dealing with life and death on one
Yeah.
side, and
Yeah.
then you get one side where it's like, hey, I really just want to be a collaborator and make a great thing with you and make beautiful stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's always a balance, and I think the thing I've suffered from early on in this career, because I think when I had my previous career, because I've worked in stuff like sales and desk jobs, and then obviously I was an engineer for years and years, and my people skills are off the chart. Like that's something I really worked on for a long, long time. I can talk to anybody,
I can
hence the
tell.
podcast. Yep. And my passion for the industry, like the books behind me, where I have hundreds of dissect this stuff. I know
Yeah,
people's work by eye, but then it's like the hard bit I've found is trying to marry the technical skill, so bringing that up to
yeah,
par to match also, because you can have people like me who are super passionate, very knowledgeable about the industry, know a lot of people, very good people skills. But then
yep.
if you aren't hitting the technical bar, it's hard to then push past that throne,
It's
I
so
guess.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many different like mindsets. There's the artistic, organic, and then there's the technical, very like, hey, let's break this thing down and be methodical about the process.
Left brain, right brain kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then and you know what? You have to have both to do this job.
Yes.
And I didn't know I was both really until I did it.
Yeah.
And I think I might have said this before to you, but I think that you kind of know the job before you know the job, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like you're in your seat, you're talking,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden you have the answers to something. And
Yep.
you're like, hey, I don't know how I got that answer, but I guess it's just because of experience and just talking about this stuff for so long.
Yeah.
And I actually have been in enough conversations where in meetings, and
Hmm.
I was, you're the subordinate. So
Yep.
you're sitting there and you're a listener and
Hmm.
sponging.
Yeah.
And I remember situations where I could have raised the flag so many times with the answer, but
Yep.
because of my position, I couldn't say anything.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember in my head during those moments, I was like, when those opportunities come, I'm going to be the one that say, hey, I have the answer to that. How can I help?
Yeah.
And let's work this stuff out together and be in a workshop and open spitball ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, guys. Like everyone out there that's really listening to this,
Hmm.
if I'm going to pass along any gems, one of the gems I can say is be patient. You'll have your time,
Hmm.
and when you do have your time, you're going to shine because people are going to really hear you, and they're
Hmm.
going to care about what you have to say because they respect that. And I
Yeah.
think it's all about that investing the time, putting
Yeah.
the time away, and just knowing when to say stuff too. I think
Yeah.
there's a patience level for that too. Like you can't jump ahead or behind. You got to let people finish.
Read the room. Yeah.
Read the room. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like it's probably I'm in a unique position as well, where the studio I'm in just right now, there's only like 5 or 6 people. So like as an indie dev, like you get that more experience of being able to like have a voice heard because there's only like 5 of you in a meeting, right? So that's not like you're dealing with departments and managers and loads of people.
Right.
But like, yeah, that's a good thing I think to always think is that when you get in those situations, it's trying to remember to take in as much as you can. Because sometimes maybe even a thing where you think you have the answer, but then someone might bring up something even better because you're listening. You're like, oh god, that was even better. Like I hadn't even thought of that. So like, yeah, and then
Right.
the years experience and then building up to it. So yeah.
You're absolutely right. And it's kind of cool. It's like a surprise to yourself. Sometimes you're like, oh
Yeah,
shit, I
like,
thought
"Oh,
of
shit,
that.
I never
That's
thought of that." Yeah,
crazy.
that's really good. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
like, you've done so many years of the animation, like, in films that, some stuff you never saw the light of day and things you worked on that never got published, but, like, I
Yeah.
mean, now you're doing, like, the big budget stuff, and obviously, like, the fact that, like, you were doing all the stuff on the side as well that got you noticed by Netflix to do Blue Samurai, I mean, that was a whole
Yeah.
conversation in itself, but, I mean, the idea of, like, the way the industry was back then, do you feel it was kind of the same as it is now, or do you feel like the skill level has went way past what you felt was initially really what people were looking for like 10 years ago?
That's such a great question. I'll slow down and answer that one because
Mhm.
it's jumped. I think every year animation has grown, and
Yep.
if you really look at it in like sort of a technical numbers format, it makes up almost 80% of the space of entertainment.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
people don't realize that. Like people do love live action stuff, no doubt. I mean,
Yep.
but if you want to capture an entire family and you want to motivate people to get to the theater and still be appeased,
Yeah.
animation sort of satisfies all those urges.
Mhm.
Japan, for example, has been making adult animation for years. You
I mean,
know,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Toriyama, like,
even beyond that, like a lot of the anime stuff that I grew up on, like Ninja Scroll and all the production ID stuff. Like
yep.
I grew up on that stuff. Like I had a
Yeah.
friend that worked at a Blockbuster Video, and he used to let me borrow like all the like Japanese animes. I watched
Yeah.
all of them.
Oh, Gundam as well, stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Gundam,
Yeah.
Voltron, like all
Yeah.
that stuff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
even Transformers was a Japanese IP before it became Transformers.
Yep.
And so to me, that stuff is just catching up finally in a good way. That's why, like, I
Yes.
think Blue Eye Samurai was born. Was people were
Yeah.
craving for a U.S. Based sort of IP to be created. That's something that's new, and
Mhm.
fortunately, I was in the right place at the right time
Mhm.
on an amazing project, and I got a chance to work with some incredible people and craft a world around it. And
Yeah.
and that one, I didn't expect it to be as big of a success as it was. To be honest with you, I think
Yeah.
Love, Death, and Robots and all of those short format anthology series came from heavy metal. If you really
Right.
look at it, I
Yeah.
grew up watching heavy metal, and then Love, Death, and Robots is our generation. It's sort of the Black Mirror for animation,
Yep.
and I was like, holy shit, that is what I've been waiting for my entire life to work on something like that.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was working on Darkmouth. I don't know if you're familiar with this project.
No.
So Alcon Entertainment, they are amazing small animation startup basically, but they came
Mhm.
from making big blockbuster live action movies, and they were doing
Yep.
their very first animated movie,
Mhm.
which is, by the way, is still getting made. So I can't say too much about it. Um, Rob Rupel, who
Mhm.
was the art director on Spider Verse,
Right.
hired me to be his art director on that project, and that's
Mhm.
where I got my first role as an art director. So I owe a lot to Rob Rupel in bringing me in.
Mhm.
And Rob and I, we designed that entire movie. So he basically left a little early, but I stayed on. They made me production designer on
Mhm.
that project, and I hired a team around me, a few people. It was
Mhm.
a very small team. I think we had under 5 artists on that show, and usually in animation it goes up to 20 people
Yeah,
in
there's a
an art.
lot, yeah.
But even on Transformers One, just to jump around, we
Mhm.
only have 9 people, including myself, in the entire art department.
Right.
So with people, I want to say this out loud because a lot of people are saying, "Hey, nobody's hiring." They
Mhm.
are hiring, but they're hiring less people now,
Right.
and that's something I've seen from my days at DreamWorks, where
Right.
and it was interesting because when I was hired on Kung Fu Panda at the very tail end of that, they
Mhm.
were just finishing up on Monsters versus Aliens, and David James was production designer on that. He had a
Mhm.
team of like, it was stacked, dude. Like there was 20 art directors on that movie. And these are people that became production designers later. It was the most
Yeah,
amazing art department I've ever seen.
can
And these are
imagine.
people like, these are serious hitters, man. These are like Patrick Hannenberger, who is
Oh,
now a
okay.
production designer on
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
the Lego movies and
Lego
stuff.
movies, yeah.
And then Ron Kurniawan, who is a production designer on Smallfoot and was on Monkeys of Mumbai, who's an amazing illustrator, one of my best friends. And
Right.
then
Okay.
all these amazing dudes like Michael Isaac, who was an art director on that,
Yeah.
who's a production designer at Sony,
Yep.
Richard Daskis, who was a viz dev artist on that, who became
Mm,
a production designer. So
mm.
it's just Scott Wills,
Yeah.
art
Oh yeah.
director of like, come on. So
Yeah.
being around that at DreamWorks,
Mm,
I learned so much.
mhm.
And it was like you didn't even like honestly have to try to learn. They were just so good that you
Yeah.
have to work. It was like Hunger Games. You
Yeah.
know, you know what I'm saying? It was like literally
Woo.
Hunger Games. Yeah, like I like
Yeah.
better step it up or I'm gonna die.
Yeah, next on
So,
the chopping block, but yeah, I mean, like adult animation has been a thing for me. I mean, I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons, as like we just talked about, in anime, and watching a lot of the Toriyama stuff, Dragon Ball back in the day, and Akira, Ghost in the Shell, like
oh
all
yeah,
that stuff that fed my imagination. But funny enough, back in 2002, 2003, and Del Toro talks about this as well, was discovering Avatar: The Last Airbender,
yep,
and Mike and Brian's whole production on that, how they went from Invader Zim at Nickelodeon to pitch this whole thing about a boy and his dog and like the elements and stuff. And that, obviously the live action just landed on Netflix, and I have mixed reactions about it, but because I think it's hard to transition one from one medium to another. That's always the difficult
that's
thing.
right.
But then now that Avatar Studios has been formed and Mike and Brian are working again with Nickelodeon, the next iteration of Avatar will be coming soon, hopefully in the next couple of years. And like I feel they were doing something adult back then, even
Yes.
20 years ago, that has been carried through. I think every animation since, even when they got to do Korra, which was then above
Hmm.
and beyond that. So it's always weird watching the original Avatar, how it's in 4:3 format, remembering that it was made for TVs.
Yeah.
I'm like, how old I am. But like, yeah, so but then, like, yes, that animation and that art style and that production value has really driven what was eventually to become my career. And
You,
yeah,
you
Mike and
nailed it.
Brian done a huge thing. Yeah.
I've had a chance to see some of the Avatar stuff because I'm over at Paramount,
Oh, of
and,
course, right? Yeah.
and they have Avatar Studios, which is in Burbank, and
Yep.
a few of my friends are over there.
Yep.
I don't know if you're familiar with Jake Pannon. Um,
No. No.
he's stupid good. Like
Yeah.
he's a production designer on that, and he
Hmm.
came from Sony and
Right.
worked on like Mitchell's versus the Machines,
I
and
can only imagine after all the success both those series have had that they're hiring only with the best now. Yeah.
it's so insane. They had Alex Konstad on there, and
Okay.
Alex and I are good friends. And Alex was art director. Now he's over at Netflix working at Adult. So they're working on some new. I can't say what he's working
Yeah.
on, but
Yeah. Yeah.
all
Fun
I have
stuff.
to say is anything Alex is doing, it's fucking insane. Like it's
Yeah.
always insane.
Yeah, I'm buddies with Rafa Gazzetti, and he's
Okay,
obviously now he's over at Netflix now as well. So like,
okay,
yeah, Netflix is starting to just pinch people from every side of the industry. Like
yeah,
they've got the budget, right? They've got the money, so it's like, yeah,
they do, and they're taking risks, and in a way they kind of hurt us too. Like I can say
Mhm.
this because I work there, and I was there during the gold rush. We call it the
Right,
gold,
okay, yeah,
and they were putting a stake down in every single corner of every facet of animation,
yeah,
and they overspent. And it's very, it's unfair. It's fair to say this because at the
hmm,
time during the pandemic, nobody was doing live action. The world
right,
shut down. Everybody was like, "Oh crap, what's the next medium that we can work in to create film?"
yeah,
And so, like Blue Eye Samurai was born, and all these shows were born because there was like real serious storytellers that
hmm,
were finding a new space, and they're like, "How do we elevate this environment?" And
yeah,
so, they were thinking of things more optically, and like,
hmm,
"Hey, we're doing this through a real lens. We're doing real staging. We're doing real
yep,
lighting." And it's different because I didn't think that way. I always thought animation was actually, this is my opinion, but I
yeah,
always thought animation's way more crafted than live action because
yes,
nothing is for free.
yeah.
Everything
You have
in
to
the
design
world,
every bucket, every stool, every bar stop. Yeah,
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 it's
yeah,
it's down to the bolt and the nut on the table. And I always say
yeah,
this, and I want to remind people that this is real cinema. Like it
mm,
is not a genre at all. And I
yeah,
love that Guillermo del Toro said that when he was
mm,
working on Pinocchio. He's
yeah,
like, animation is cinema. And
yeah,
now it's becoming, there's still this weird thing that happens even at the Academy when they're talking about the Oscars and stuff. They're like, "Oh, hey, here's that little kid section of our discussion,"
yeah,
and it's like,
yeah,
no, no, no. Like we've been doing serious stuff for a very long time,
yep,
and I think it deserves a lot more respect. And
yeah,
I've worked in live action, I worked in theme park design and VR
yeah,
space, and
hmm,
I still have more fun in animation than any other medium.
Same dude. Yeah, I mean, like one of these things. Like we talked about this with my partner. We were talking about because we're metalheads, so we're into metal. But the fact that the Grammys only have one genre for metal and one award kind of like category, whereas like R&B and then mostly country pop and rock
Yeah,
all have like 5 or 6 categories within different thing. So like even with the Oscars, it's like yeah, animation is almost just one singular thing. And even the movies that were up this year. I mean, Boy and the Heron. I've not seen it yet, but I've obviously been told it's really great.
stunning.
But the other films that were in that category, I was like, that every one of these should have won some type of award. But
Hmm.
you only get best animation. You don't even get like best sound animation. So it's like, yeah, it's one of these things where I just wish that and Del Toro. I'm hoping and other guys like that because my buddy Glenn worked on Del Toro's Pinocchio. He worked with some of the puppet makers and stuff. But he was just saying that it took them that was 10 years getting that film off the ground because
Oh, for sure.
it just like nobody was buying the IP. Nobody was like, why do we need this? But like Del Toro, I think obviously now having done stuff like Hellboy and other films, he was like, you had that fan behind him that people were like, okay, you can make something cool. But
Mm,
his belief and just believing in animation is something that we really need to keep in the industry and
yeah,
not let it die with people who stop making films or move on. Even with Favreau, right? I mean, like
without a
he
doubt.
obviously cut his teeth on animation as well as doing live action and like such a Star Wars nerd and like the whole thing he's
Filoni,
done with Mando. But
yeah,
then even if you look at like Dave Filoni, who was Matt Gazer, he was one of the guys who worked with Matt. And Dave then worked. He done Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then he worked in Clone Wars. Like so
yeah,
with Matt. So like yeah, so people who've came from the animation background are going into live action. It totally changes the landscape, right?
it does, and you learn so much. I will speak a little bit about Transformers. We're working with Industrial Light and Magic, and as our production client and actually friendship, it's more of a
Yep.
collaboration than anything else. It's really
Yeah.
we've created a true partnership between Paramount and ILM.
Yep.
I will say that it's a dream come true,
Mhm.
and it's everything I've ever thought it was going to be and more.
Yep.
And the people that I'm working with, I have to say, sort of a swan song thing happened. I get a little emotional about this one actually because we
Mhm.
worked with Singapore and they
Okay.
shut down recently, and
Yep.
they did on Transformers One Singapore. It's their magnum opus. Like
Right.
they legit put everything that they have, and because they knew they were shutting down,
Yeah.
and they were working harder
Mhm.
on their shots than they had ever done before because they knew that they needed to do the most amazing thing before they closed
Yeah.
the studio, and you felt it. Like when
Yeah,
we were
man.
on calls with Alex Pritchard, who was our VFX supervisor in
Mhm.
Singapore,
Mhm.
it was like a one and done. Like they would get
Yeah.
stuff like in the first shot, it was approved. That's how good
Yeah.
they were.
Yeah. I mean, the
And
Asian market in general is just yeah.
it's just it was amazing, and getting a chance to work with them because I got to go to Stagecraft. We
Mhm.
went over to Sydney into
Mhm.
Australia, and we've been working with Fraser Churchill, who is our
Okay.
VFX supervisor, who VFX supervised Scott Pilgrim, and he is just incredible. Like
Mhm.
his team, everybody he works with, Alex Fry and A Popescu and all these amazing artists, Gene Chi. These guys are legends in their field, and a lot
Yep.
of them they're doing animation for the first time,
Mhm.
and they're killing it. Like
Yeah.
they've worked on Mando and all these amazing shows. And I knew already because they're in the VFX world. It's computer graphics design,
Mhm.
so they're already doing animation, but they didn't know it yet. They're
Yeah.
like they're doing animation, but for live action plates.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but how do we take what you're doing and sort of craft it? And not saying it's not crafted before, but craft it in a way that fits into
Yeah.
this genre, but also play to all the strengths and to all the weaknesses of
Yeah.
that pipeline. And I got to say, they knocked it out of the park. And I'm very excited about Ultraman too, because I got a chance to work on Ultraman as well.
Yep.
And it is, I just saw it like
Mhm.
2 weeks ago. It's going to be at Annecy in June.
Okay.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's a game changer for animation.
Yeah.
So there's two big. I'm so excited about these two projects. I really hope that the world can
Just
see
hype up
how
the world
much
for animation. It's like
it's
even
exciting. It's
yeah.
very exciting.
I mean, even the left field like knockout punch for me was like, I mean, I'd seen Sausage Party and it was what it was, but then for Seth to going back the Turtles,
Yeah.
like, and I was like, where did that come from? But he was like, dude, like I've loved the Turtles forever. Like it's been a dream project. I mean, to get a Turtles movie made, and I was like, what? And right off the, I think that was actually right off the back of Spider Verse when that was coming out as well.
It
So
was same
it's
team, same art
yeah,
department.
yeah. So it's like if we can just get more of these heavy hitters just to fling these huge banners like
Yep.
like Transformers, Turtles, Spider-Man, like just keep flinging them. It's like, the more money that we get for the box office, the more you can sit and people and say, well, look at all these numbers, look at all this money we're making, we can make more stuff. But then yeah, it's like the ever evolving of the line must go up, because like the first friends I made in the industry was Blizzard guys, because I was a huge Warcraft fan. So when I did everybody and from LinkedIn and stuff, it was all the guys from Blizzard. And sitting watching a couple of my friends like taking pictures on their Instagram, being like, "Oh, dude, Phil Spencer's here. Like he's throwing us a party for the merger and blah blah blah." And I'm sitting there like, "Oh, okay then." And then like 2 weeks later, rug from under their feet, and I was like,
Oh,
Jesus Christ! Like
yeah.
to sit there and stand in front of those guys and be like, "You're part of the Xbox family. Congratulations!" And then like just I mean, and animation, obviously, like I think you posted up about like DreamWorks and stuff as well, and things that are happening there. And I've seen people talking about a couple of guys that worked on the What If series. They've done a kind of podcast mini thing as well, where they've talked about the ebbs and flows of the industry. But they were like, it can't sustain like this forever. We can't just like keep making productions and then firing whole teams and then hiring them back again. And because you get
Yeah.
that actual 10% of people, like leads and singers, who will get laid off and just leave the industry altogether and never come back, and then you
Yeah.
lose
Like
all that experience. Yeah.
you're to piggyback off what you're saying, the going back to Netflix, like during
Mhm.
the pandemic, they hired everybody. They were
Mm,
all the other studios were sort of losing all their major players, and
mm,
they were sort of this giant black hole in the
mhm.
middle of the industry, just sucking all this talent in.
Yeah,
And they told everybody this is a place for creators. This was a
yeah,
place for artists, so they can actually have voices.
yeah.
And so that motivated me to want to go there. I was so motivated, and everybody else that I had worked around were like, "We're going there. We're going there." So it was like this
Mm,
amazing buzz around the studio.
yeah.
But then right after the pandemic, they're like, wait, we can't keep all these IPs. And so all these like amazing starships got spit back out into space.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there's a lot of these giant star destroyers just sitting up there in space right now,
Floating.
hovering, waiting for the next thing.
Yeah.
And we're in a weird spot right now. I think it's going to take at least a year or maybe even a
Mm,
little bit longer for the industry to sort of stabilize.
yeah.
There are going to be big tentpole projects no matter what. And we were just
Yeah.
talking about this before we went live about sequels.
Yep.
And people are super afraid to invest in new IP right now. You're going to see a lot more sequels being greenlit,
Mhm.
less original content, less
Established
original
IP
IP.
stuff people
Yeah,
know.
it
Yeah.
has to be established, or if it's like a best-selling novel,
Yep.
or something that's already had a bread and butter or a stake and a claim to it.
Yep.
You'll see a lot of young adult novels starting to sort of emerge too as well,
YA
because they're
crowd.
looking at
Yeah.
IP that have their bestseller status,
Yep.
and they're like, hey, let's make a series out of that. So that's
Yeah.
starting to happen too as
Yeah.
well. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of these things, I think that fair enough. I mean, I think the last time I spoke to an economist in LA, he was talking about like the 2 to 3 year mark, where he was thinking 26, 27, you might see like a resurgence of people getting hired en masse again. But the next couple of years at least, he feels will be really bumpy as everything just like settles and
yeah,
flows and evens out again. So but then again, I'm speaking to the guys at Empty Vessel in a couple of weeks, Stig at a point as well for his new studio. Um but then it's like a thing where the guys who have now left are making the roads out of where they were and forming these new studios. I'm hoping they're going to be built off the back of, we don't want to repeat of where we were. We want to make something new, take those lessons that we learned and try and make a more less toxic, more inviting environment, and a place people can kind of grow old in. Because like the industry I came from in engineering, like you could have probably had that job from when you started at 16 or 18 till you died. Like you were there, you worked like your mother, like working in a job for 40, 50 years.
yeah,
What I found actually, there was a Singapore national kind of gallery where the government and was kind of getting pitched on the idea that people who are leaving college right now in their 20s, there needs to be a fund set up for them nationally, so when they hit 40 they can retrain again, because of things like AI. The world is moving so quickly now, you can't really stay in the same job forever. You know what I mean? It's really
yeah.
short lived. And I feel that's the
It's
thing with animation, it's always been, is that you're jumping from one pole to the next. You know what I mean?
it's true. Yeah, and going into the AI factor, I feel like all the major studios and not so much Paramount. They're not talking about it at all. Actually, they're against it.
Yeah.
They're I'm talking about Netflix. I'm talking about some of these studios. I'm starting to hear whispers of them using that as a
Oh, I've
tool.
seen a couple of news and people are talking about it already. They're hiring people for Frizz Dev, like
Oh yeah,
pre-production stuff. Yeah, yeah.
and it's a bummer. I don't like how much they're pushing that as an agenda. It's on my Instagram now. Like it's like use Meta, like you search with Meta AI, and
Yeah.
going on LinkedIn and you see everything's AI based, and
Yeah.
I'm a little bummed out, man, because I
Mm,
don't think we need it. I think that it's emerging technology
mhm,
that has become a forerunner now. And
mhm.
yes, it does make amazing. Sora makes great results, but
Yeah.
in my opinion,
It lacks
it, it's
soul.
it's soulless. It loses its grit.
Yeah.
It just becomes this smooth, perfectly calculated. And I know you can obviously prompt things to be a certain way, but I don't care. Like, I'm not going to jump on that bandwagon.
Art's not
I'm
supposed to be
not supporting
perfect.
it. No,
Yeah.
and
The
that I
dents
just
in your
want it
soul are
done.
the things that make things beautiful. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I
I've
mean,
I've talked to Michelle about it a little bit, and you know, I there's parts of it I do understand why people get it and use it.
yeah. Mhm.
There's parts of it where I find like, oh, hey, this could be something potentially unique.
Yeah.
But my problem with it is the unethical part of it and how it's
Oh yeah.
scraping images from us. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the scary thing about Facebook and Instagram is they've been collecting our images for years.
Yep.
And they have this huge, huge archive of our faces and all of the places we've been to and all the food we've
Photos
eaten,
of our kids, photos of our
photos of our
relatives.
children. Yeah, just
Yeah.
in our pets. It's ridiculous and it's really
Yeah.
unethical.
Mhm.
And I'm having a huge problem with that. And I think that it's made me want to almost like get off of social media a few times.
Yeah.
My brother is not on social media.
No,
My
I
twin
can
brother,
imagine
he's
why.
like,
Yeah.
fuck social media. Like, I do not
Yep.
want to be a part of it. If
Yep.
people want to reach me, they can give me a call. They know my number.
Dude, the amount of work I've got since I've switched social media off, like, I mean, I'm just like so stereotypical through my. I'm learning this now. Like, I'm turning 40 next year, right? So, but then I've learned this all through my 30s. Is that I was sucked into that machine for so long and really chasing every clout and every, arguing with people, during the Black Lives Matter when I was arguing with people about that movement and everything, and trying to get the podcast set up around that, and people, giving me shit and arguing with people online. It got to a point where I was just like so sick of it. And I had this conversation really early on with Corey Loftus, and Corey was talking about, when AI really struck, he was like, "What the fuck is going?" Because at the time, I was also part of a movement with Carl Ortiz and Steven Zapata, and they were going to like the government with all this stuff. And Corey was like, "What the fuck is happening?" And I'm like, "Dude, like, here's all the information I know. Go have a wee look, see what you." But he just was like, overnight, he was like, "I can't fucking believe this! Like, every single thing I've ever drawn for Disney, and it's just on there, and people are prompting it, and they're prompting my name and my style, and
Yeah.
it's just it physically makes me nearly want to cry and get shivers up my back when the people who are my heroes, who have grown up making this stuff, are now in a position where they're afraid for not only their safety but also their career. And it's like a thing of the shift that is happening in the world. It's just something that we've never had to deal with. I mean, like, if you look at my generation as millennials, we've had to deal with nearly three global recessions, a pandemic, and possibly now a war. So it's like it's such a crazy time right now. We talk
It
about
is.
art and making and production, but like it's hard to then create when the world around you is like so toxic because you're using most of your energy just to survive, right? Which is
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to that too. It's important to use that energy that's around you for the positive. And
Yep.
I know it's so easy. There has to be a balance, right? There has to be a way to take that toxicity and negativity and turn it into a positivity.
Mhm.
And it's a conscious effort and work to do that.
Yeah.
And this is something I say to students all the time. I'm working with a lot of high schoolers at Sisler Create, which is a school that's in
Oh
Canada, in
yeah.
Winnipeg. And I get on with them, monthly, and we talk about their project, and we talk about mental health all the time. That's something that not a lot of
Yep.
people talk about, and
Yeah.
we're very aware of it. And the socio dynamic economic climate that we're in right now, and physiologically, we're all getting taxed by that. And I think that as a evolutionary thing, as we are human beings in this world, we have to be more understanding of what's really going on and cognitive of those surroundings.
Mhm.
And I think that for you and I talking about this is really important. Stay positive, stay hungry, still be passionate about what you do and love what you do every single
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Make an effort to do it because
Mhm.
it's too easy to be destroyed by all this negativity around you.
Yeah. That's what
AI
feeds the
is
machine.
definitely part of that. I feel like
Yeah.
it's a huge factor. You know.
Yeah, it's funny as well with a lot of the bad actors in the space as well because I've watched a lot of documentaries and read a lot of books on like the last progress from when I originally was involved in that NFT project up until the crypto space, and you see everybody who was initially involved in NFT who moved to crypto, and then everyone who's in crypto moved to AI. It's like it's the
Mm,
next Ponzi scheme. It's the next because even now like AI, I've now talked with enough serious people, including guys like Feng Zhu, who have talked about how it can't really take your job. How it really at this point is just like a dream machine. It's not really at the point where it's going to do anything like production worthy. You know, it's making pretty pictures. Everyone can do that to an extent. It's the detailed mechanical function problem solving stuff that really is where
But
we
it
come into
will.
that mix. Yeah,
But it
well,
will.
this is the thing. What he's saying is the now, but then I don't know, years from now. But the thing is, the experts I've spoke to, the guys who are separate from the industry or who just work on AI, are like, it's almost like OpenAI and these companies are over promising. You look at Stable Diffusion, right, and their CEO who's just left and that's went bankrupt. Like, it really is like a hollow shell of something that they're promising that can't be delivered. And the guys I know who are talking about like the singularity and the conscious AI, they're like, that's like 60 years away. Like, we're nowhere near that. Like, it can make you a schedule or like a dietary plan on OpenAI, but it can't do anything worthy of work
Yeah,
for a long time. So yeah.
it can and it can't. I think it's like we were talking about tools.
Hmm.
You know, if you want to do a singular object and you
Right.
want to craft a world around a singular object, or hey, you want to get something for a pitch, this
Yeah.
is where we get hurt
Yeah.
because you know this is the place that you need to be cognizant of is
Hmm.
these a lot of directors don't want to hire artists. It's easier
Yeah.
for them to have like a bunch of prompts that they write down for
Yeah.
sequences that they're going to be pitching for a movie, go into Midjourney, go into Stable Diffusion, whatever
Hmm.
background they're using,
Yeah.
and then run that prompt, and then have something as a visual to talk to the studios about instead of actually hiring an artist to do it. And I'm
Yeah.
seeing that happen. I've had people that are directors,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to name names, pitch AI to me,
Yeah,
and I'm like, oh, this is
I know.
happening way too often now.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to do art for you
Mhm.
because I automatically know that you're going down that pigeonhole, and I'm not going to jump in that hole with you. You know, it's just to me, it's kind of divisive, and it's a little bit, it's like shooting ourselves in the foot. And I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. I want to stay in my
Mhm.
lane, still craft things from my imagination,
Yeah,
look at all these amazing books that you and I have, and do
yeah,
that research, and then use those images and ideas and inject them back into our work.
yeah.
And I may be a little bit of a dinosaur and come to the game late if it
Mhm.
does end up going that direction, but I might be the last person to hold out.
Yeah, but you'll still have your fucking soul intact. You'll still have your morals. Your compass will not be unchanged. You know, you'll still have some kind of like level of pride. Like, I'm not saying people who use it are soulless. Like, I mean, whatever. Like, if
No,
you're experimenting with it,
it's
okay,
fine.
cool, right? But
Yeah,
like, I think it's just the integrity of always been like,
integrity. Yes.
yeah, like the thing I've always chose to do has always been the more difficult path. But like, look, if I wanted to stay in my job and earn whatever I earned back in the day and work in a job where it was soulless and I can collect my paycheck and go home and play video games, sure, I could have done that for the rest of my life. But I wanted to change and be better and do something interesting with my life. And so I think it's one of these things where you have the choice in front of you, like, and I think as long as people at your level, like you and Corey and other people and Raf and stuff, are turning around and saying to people, we don't want to use that, we don't, then the studios get to a point because I mean, I spoke to Rennie the other day, who's a solo game developer, but she's worked for other big triple A's, and she was saying the thing with AI is that, like, especially for game production, if you say to someone like, "Here's $20 million to make a game," right?
Yeah,
And you're saying with AI you can save $10 million, the studio will then be like, "Cool, we'll spend the other 10 million doing even better features." And like the same when we had the conversations about Naughty Dog recently with Neil and stuff, how he was saying that that they're trying to eliminate the crunch culture by planning stuff a bit better out. But then if you plan stuff and everything runs on time, then you're like, "Oh great, we've got an extra 5 hours, we can just make extra stuff." Like, you never stop. You're not, as an artist, as a production team, you're never worried too much about the budget. You have to stay in budget, obviously, but like the more money you have, you're always going to use that to just make something better. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want to do, is make the best thing you possibly can.
that's true. Yeah, it's about the final outcome, and it's about being part of a team.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I just want to work with cool people, and I want to
Hmm.
be around projects that are inspirational.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to find now because
Yeah.
there's just so few and far between. And fortunately, on many of the projects I've worked on, I've been blessed in that sense where people want to make something different that makes a wave that stands out and is
Hmm.
unique. And Transformers was my chance to sort of create my own visual look on a
Right.
movie.
Yeah.
And working with Josh Cooley is a dream come true because he just trusts his team.
Hmm.
He's working with he puts the best people around him in a place where they could be their best,
Hmm.
and he is a sponge as well, and he's learning from us and is truly invested in that process of seeing, hey, people evolve into the best that they could possibly be. And you get great ideas that way. You're in a room with someone and there's an open format, people share, people give, and sometimes you just go, hey, I don't have an ego, I'm just here to get the best possible result on the screen, and all of us are doing that. And I think we can
Yeah.
feel that every day when we're working on the movie.
Yeah. I think also as we band together as a people as well as like a collective art form, like the actors did when they had the strikes last year. It's a thing of like the studios may hold some element of power, but then at the end of the day, we are the people that work for them and make the things they
Oh
want. So
yeah,
like, yeah, we really have to. And
I
again, it's
think
why I
that
think
happened.
after the mass layoffs, we're now talking about unionization and try to get that all involved. I mean, animation's had unions for a long, long time, so
Yep, of
but games are still fresh out of the gate, so they're still figuring a lot of that stuff out. But I
course.
think the more we collect together, I think the safer we'll be.
I think it's a unionizing is so important. It's a very old tradition to be in part of a union.
Hmm.
It goes back to the early 20s. But I
Yep.
think thinking about this in terms of animation,
Hmm.
839 is our union, local 800
Hmm.
839. We have to. We're going into negotiations very soon, and the studios are going to need to speak up about what their
Hmm.
stance is on AI and all the things we were discussing. There's going to be some serious topics happening here very soon in June, in July, and we may go striking. And that's one of
Yeah.
those things where, hey, what do we do? What do we, what is the next step here for our business? And
Yeah.
I think that it needs to happen. If it needs to happen, it needs to happen. It's going to hurt the economy, of course,
Yep.
and it's one of those things where it's either you do it now or you wait 10 years from now and you do it again later, but you
Yep.
got to do it at some point. And it could be at the worst time, but it's better to do it while you're scraping the bottom than to do it at the very, very top.
Yeah, it's one of these things where you're kind of fighting for the soul of the industry. I mean, I know recently
Mhm.
there's been articles about OpenAI are starting to pitch to Hollywood and they're starting to pitch to studios and talk about what's achievable. I know they've also really been in bed right now with Nvidia. Recently, there was an article came about how they were really doing stuff with them as well. And yeah, it's one of these things where, I get where people come to have the argument of like the cat's out of the bag and there's nothing we can do to stop it. But I think, like most regulation, especially now in the EU, we have a lot of regulation. So a couple of things have happened recently. So we've got the New York Times lawsuit that's still ongoing. We also have the European Union have just passed an EU law for AI. So it now means that companies have to, within the European Union, disclose where their information, where their data sets come from, because then it can be trained as ethical, unethical. But also talking about Ultraman, where you worked on it, so the person, I think there's no creator who within China owns the IP. He then sued AI because of what was getting produced in China. He won. So China basically legality said that AI is copyright infringement, so they owed royalties to him. So like if we keep getting those kind of mini wins here and there, it will hopefully start to level out into the fact that like we
Yeah.
probably will integrate in some way, but then under the artist jurisdiction, right? It's within our control, within our power. We decide what gets used and doesn't get used. It's less the studios, it's more us because we have the power to create the productions. So yeah, it's definitely one of these things where it's going to happen regardless. But difficult times again because obviously last year's during the strike, a lot of guys I know, like Philip Boutte and stuff like that, who work for Marvel, like they were really hurting because they were basically living off their savings for 6 months, and it's really difficult when you build up that reserve and it all just dwindles within a couple of months. So it's going to be a really tough time ahead. So, but then again, fighting the good fight, nothing never comes easy. And I know my father, who was an engineer back in the 70s and 80s, who was out in the picket lines fighting for sick pay, like that was a thing we didn't even have back then, just to be off sick and still get paid for your work and maternity leave, working hour weeks where we only work 40 hours a week. Like a lot of that stuff all came from the European Union, but also because we stood out in the cold and fought for it. So
Yeah.
it's just a thing we all, I think, at one point have to go through in our industry to correct because we can't keep giving in to the billion and trillionaires and guys like Bob Iger who just have infinite money and don't really give a shit and cut down trees so people can stand under the shade.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look, it's really just growing pains.
Yeah.
And it's history repeats itself. And you look
Yep.
at all the great wars that are fought, they're fought for damn good reason,
Yep.
and this is a different type of war. It's
Hmm.
definitely an economic, social, dynamic war
Yeah.
that we're going to all have to band together on and overcome. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like we're at a good point right now where if we just keep talking to each other and we keep
Hmm.
staying informed, and like you're doing your due diligence to learn about all the different bills that are being passed in government. That's the key, man, is
Yeah.
to just keep looking at those specific signs
Yeah.
and know exactly what those mean, and
Hmm.
that way you have a very good dialogue to speak to in the
Yeah.
conversation. I
Yeah.
think that having these podcasts are super important too, because there are a lot of people that aren't aware of it.
Yeah.
And just being aware and having an understanding of some, it doesn't have to be as deep dive as you have, Gordon. Like
Yeah.
it's maybe it's just like the skimming the top of the surface. But
Yeah.
I think that it's in some ways I actually like being a little naive. I like being a little incoherent to certain aspects because it keeps me a little bit more positive. I
Yeah.
find when I go down the rabbit hole too deeply, I can tend to get too caught up in it and
Yeah.
in a way become almost like a conspiracy theorist and sort
Yeah,
of try to
yeah,
solve all the world's
yeah.
problems. And I think that's
Yeah,
also something healthy, is know when to check out too, in order to
yeah.
save yourself, you know,
I mean,
because you
yeah,
can
I
get
mean, like, yeah, the balance is hard, man. Like, I mean,
it
my
is
ADHD
very
brain
hard.
is just like it's so wired to just
Oh
induce
yeah,
information all the time, which makes you a great creative. But like at the same time,
it does.
I think I need to focus on another thing because I watched a talk the other day with Lady Gaga, funny enough, but she was talking about how, well, as a creative, if you're not creating constantly and you're kind of sitting in your own space, all it does is make your head just go further and further and further and further down the dark rabbit hole, like you said.
Yes,
And you think of the worst case scenarios, you think of the world and what's going to happen with this, that, and the other thing. You need to unleash that energy you have swirling
you
in your
do.
brain into something positive. Whether
It's called head swell, right?
yeah,
You know,
yep, yep,
it's a weird thing where your mind starts to sort of bloat and get oversized on one side, or lopsided. And
yeah,
the healthy exercise is to write, to write that stuff down, or
yep.
go for a walk and sort of talk about it with friends and have a
Dance,
community.
sing, make
Yeah.
something. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
love having community. That's one thing I'll highly encourage any of the listeners, is find people that are like-minded and
mhm,
flock together and discuss these things, have topics to discuss. And I
mhm,
have people I regularly call on a weekly basis and
yeah,
have these kind of conversations with, and it's
mhm,
just super healthy.
yeah,
It makes you realize, like, that we're all in the same boat together. We're all sort
yep,
of floating in the same ocean.
yeah, yeah,
And I look at our industry. I always say this to friends, like, we're kind of puddle skipping, and
yeah,
it's like, what does that mean? You look for the wettest puddle and you jump from one puddle to the next in this industry in order to keep jobs and stay afloat. And not all jobs pay the same. Not all of the people that you work with are going to be cool. But
yeah,
if you have something for the time being and it keeps you well and you could
mhm,
still have your community,
yeah,
that's the key. It really
yeah.
is.
I mean, and also like the whole like I mean, it's like an echo chamber of from my first episode to this episode where we're like we're 100 deep. Personal
Yeah.
projects is something that like every single person for nearly 8 years has talked about.
Wow.
Nearly 10 years. It's like speaking to Ian McCaig, like the
Yeah.
fact that he is now writing and producing short stories and books, like there's always something in the background. Like Ian talks about Star Wars, vividly of like, oh, it was a great time. I really enjoyed my time there. But he then is always so focused on like what he's doing, like what, he
Yeah.
works for contract, he works for these studios, but then like what is he doing as a person? What's his legacy he's going to leave behind? And I think like a lot of that has been outreach stuff where like either it's with THU or schoolism, like he's get onto
Yeah.
the minds of like students. He likes, meeting people, young people especially, and trying to inform them about like what the industry's really like and how to get through it and stay positive. Because Ian, he
Yeah.
was just like he was born without that part of his brain that makes him sad. Like it's just it's
Yeah.
just like
He's just infectious to be around.
ray of sunshine. So
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's one of these things, personal projects. But then like for you, what you were doing built into a project that it built from personal into work. And Blue Eyed Samurai, I think was like I think you've talked about this with Michi, obviously, but like what was the origin of those paintings? Was it just something like you were doing to decompress from work, what you were doing at the time?
No, so when I was in college, funny enough, you mentioned this. I'm obsessed, as have seen with my personal work with
Mhm.
samurais, and I have a
Right.
story I wrote. It was mostly an outline,
Yep.
and I met a friend named Tim Kalick
Mhm.
and Jonathan Ryder, and I said, "Hey, would you guys like to work on this story with me?" And I read
Mhm.
it to them. I showed them all my visuals that I was crafting still in college, and
Mhm.
they're like, "Yeah, dude, let's make this thing." And so in the background, while we were in school, while we are in our personal lives and in our careers, we kept working on it. And both of them got really busy. So I was the only one that sort of kept going on it.
Right.
But it was my idea, it was my brain trust to sort of come up with the story. And all these visuals that you've been seeing in my work, my personal work, are
Mhm.
just me testing the style.
Right.
And so I was like, hey, how do I keep the style evolving? And so it
Mhm.
started off like very concept arty.
Mhm.
And then after a while, I was like, hey, I like going more graphic with this. I like woodcut. I like wood
Yeah.
block. And I was looking at Yoshida, and I was looking at a lot of like manga stuff, like even and all the like the most important stuff to me is always the stuff where I feel like it's speaking to me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't looking at any animation stuff. I was looking at art, like real like background paintings
Mm.
and stuff, and
Right.
stuff that you were seeing in museums, and saying, hey, how do I take the best of that and make something into a movie?
Right.
And so the idea for this project, for it's called Yamamoto, that's the
Mhm.
project I've been working on, is a story about my brother and I. And it's the story about two people that basically, I won't say anything specific because I am pitching it.
Yeah, working on
Um,
yeah.
it's it's basically the story of two people that split apart and then come back together. That's
Right, okay.
basically it. and there's a reason why. There's like a huge rift that happens in between,
Mhm.
and it's like the typical protagonist antagonist hero's journey, kind
Yeah.
of thing. But the visuals have always been in my head. It's a crazy thing. I don't know if this happens to you, Gordy, but
Mhm.
I'm dreaming and I wake up and it's like almost like a fever dream where it's still in my mind, and
Mhm.
then I'll start painting it out. And I have this really strange sort of like visual library in my head of
Yeah.
different types of shapes and
Mhm.
like textures,
Mhm.
and that's what all those paintings are. They're visual shapes and textures that I got to get out.
You
It's almost
literally
like a
just
little bit of like exercising the demons a bit.
Yeah, you literally just the thing you just said. I just watched an interview with James Cameron when he talked
Oh
about, because he's just put out a book, and he's also doing an art show in Paris where he's showing off his work from like Alien and stuff all the way back to like the paintings
yeah.
and storyboards he done. And he talks about the exact same thing, how he will wake up from dreams and sit and draw and paint things he's just like seen in his vision. And that's, I think that was some of the early stuff that came up for Alien. That's where he got a lot of those early xenomorph stuff involved. So like, yeah, like I think it's a very, if you're, I mean, lucid dreaming is something I've seen George and a couple other painters I've met who are like the old school painters who used to do, who engaged in lucid dreaming mostly because they felt their dreams were so vivid they wanted to capture them as much as they could. And George Harrison, I mean, he definitely done that painting where like when the moon's crashing into the earth, and that was always kind of really famous at the time. But like, yeah, it's a thing of like, I think it's, is it aphasia? You know, the thing that people have where like if you tell them to picture an apple in their head, some people
Yeah.
can't do that. Like they can't even think of a that's like a blank space. It's like they have to almost verbalize what they're thinking. But for me, I can almost create entire worlds, people talking, voices. Like my
Hmm.
brain sometimes works on that level, and I'm thinking also almost like, is that the level you have to be sometimes to be at the echelon you're at, where you're, you have those like high level like thoughts and feelings within your dreams that you bring into reality. It's quite a deep question, obviously, but like I feel like if you're up subconsciously or unconsciously thinking of art within your mind, how
Yeah.
does that translate into real world stuff? It's a hard dynamic to shift across, because how do you paint what you see in your mind?
It's definitely true because there's it's sort of a savant thing that happens. I noticed this with my dad too, because my
Mhm.
dad is really great at storytelling,
Right.
and he loves sci-fi. So I was always listening to him talk about his books that he's read, like 2001: Space Odyssey and
Right.
a lot of the Stephen King novels and stuff. But
Yeah.
specifically, sitting in an environment, I remember these days of just sitting in my backyard looking at a tree
Mhm.
and just watching light move through the trees onto the like branches.
Right.
Stories would just start popping into my head,
Yeah.
and it's a weird thing that happens to visual people where
Mhm.
they're sort of feeling, touching. It's visceral, and it's this connection to their environment and to their craft
Mhm.
and creating. And
Yeah.
as an artist, if you it's a lifetime of discovery.
Yeah.
You're fully invested in this. It's not a job. It's never been a job to me. It's about who I am. It's literally in my DNA.
Identity. Yeah.
And people love that, and they see it, and they want to work with people that have that kind of passion for what they do.
Yeah.
And there's the greats of our lifetime, like the James
Mhm.
Camerons and
Mhm.
people that are creating these like magnum opus stories that they
Yeah.
want to like craft into this something, and it takes time to get there, and you just got to be patient with yourself. Like I love what I really love about Denis Villeneuve is he's like starting to come into the limelight finally.
Yeah. June
I,
was incredible.
I've
Yeah.
I've been watching him since like way before Dune.
Oh, since Serpico for me. Yeah.
Yeah,
Way
since
back in the
Serpico,
day.
yes. And
Yeah.
my favorite film actually is still Arrival, like
Mm.
from him. And I
Shit,
like
the
Dune.
visual language in that. Wow. Yeah.
It's stunning, and it's like simplified in a way, and the storytelling and the way it all ties together at the end. He is exactly like, in a way, I've heard interviews with him, and he talks about how he actually crafts shots from dreams too. And I
Mm.
actually heard that there's a scene in they stayed in the desert after the filming of Dune 1,
Right.
and he just sat in the environment, and he was talking about how he was just letting the mountains speak to him, and how the light was moving over the mountains and saying, hey,
Fucking
that's a shot,
deep.
let's shoot that. Like, I
Yeah.
have my
Wow.
crew here, let's start shooting this. And
Yeah.
that was all b-roll. A lot of the stuff, with the eclipse and
Yeah.
seeing all that's all practical. It was all shot on location,
Yeah.
and it's because they spent time there. And in order for
Yeah.
something to become a masterpiece, and in order for something to be great, you have to
Mhm.
spend time with it. You can't rush that process.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why, in a way, Blue Eye Samurai was born. And I'm not trying to float my own boat, but
No, no, no.
Jane messaged me when I first started working on the project, Jane Wu, she was the supervising director. Now she's the EP.
Yes.
And she's like, I got to be honest with you. With my pitch deck, it's all your work. And I go, whoa, I didn't know. It was kind of flattering, but also kind of like, whoa,
Yeah.
I didn't know that you were using my work to pitch this project to the
Whole thing.
studio.
Yeah.
So it was like kind of like a backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, okay, I can get down with that. Let's hire a team around this. And,
Mhm.
Yun, I don't know if you know who Yun Ling is, but
No.
Yun was an artist on Spider-Verse, and he works
Okay.
very specifically with Alberto Maeglo.
Okay.
And he did a lot of the Love, Death, and Robots, The Witness,
Yeah, no, Albert. Yeah.
and Jabaro and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so Yun and I are old friends. We met on the Saigen forums back in the day when like Craig Mullins was doing speed paintings with Vile and all those guys.
Jesus.
And
Back in
so,
the day.
I'm from that same thinking where I'm like, hey, all the people I love, I admire,
Mhm.
and I'm inspired by, I'm going to hire them one day.
Mhm.
And that was the first project I got a chance to do that, where I was like, I'm going to grab everybody from every facet, even Naomi Baker, who went on to work at Marvel
Mhm.
with Carla and stuff. Like
Mhm.
Naomi was like, I was a fan. I was like, oh my God, her drawings of characters have so much emotions to them.
Yeah.
She designed Mizu. Like the
Yeah.
reason why
Yeah.
Mizu is fucking Naomi Baker and
Yeah.
Wayne Johnson, who was a teacher at Art Center and
Yeah.
an amazing illustrator. I was like, I gotta get him on this project to design characters.
Mhm.
Like all Ringo, that's his character. Like
Yeah.
Ringo was designed by Wayne, and
Yeah.
Swordfather is Wayne.
Mhm.
And so I had all these ideas in my head of
Mhm.
these characters, and we had lots of conversations without the showrunners there,
Mhm.
without the director there, and talked about all these things.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I left the show
Yeah.
because there was a lot of differing personalities in it. I won't
Mhm.
go into detail,
Yeah.
but it was I was tormented by the thought of leaving,
Mhm.
but I had to preserve my sanity. And it was
Yeah.
during the worst time of my life, and
Mhm.
people in my family were really sick, and it was during
Mhm.
the pandemic.
Mhm.
So I was like, this is the best thing I can do at this possible time.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that people realized that it was my work.
Yeah.
To me, that makes me super happy that even though they didn't give me the Annie Award, I was nominated, but I
Mhm.
wasn't given the Annie Award for the show. I
Mhm.
know that that's my Annie Award.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to, tell anybody that. Everybody knows that. It's like one of those things where you could walk away from it and hold your head high and be like, that was a really good experience. I learned so much from it.
Yeah. We don't do these things for the accolades anyway. We do them for the feeling of creating something and giving something a lasting meaning in the world. And I
Thank you
think,
for saying that. Yes, exactly.
yeah, like me and Ian have talked about this a couple of times, and Ian was like very like, you think like me, Gordon. When I said to him once that, Ian, I just want to like leave the world a little brighter than I found it, and he was like, same, yeah. So, and it's one of these things
So
that
special.
I mean, that's like, George making Star Wars, like, think of the amount of scientists, doctors, engineers, artists, especially, that have formed their whole lives and careers around one thing that he created, and people might look to your show because it's been so well received, obviously, and look at it down the line as like the standard for how to make animated series in the future. You know what I mean? And that's
It
because of
is.
things you've done. The giants that crafted the mountains, as we talk about back in the day with old Norse. But like, yeah, that's the thing like that you can now think of. And God damn it, if I don't want you to get involved in working on a Star Wars Visions short at one point, because I think it would be fucking
Oh
incredible.
my god, that would be so sick.
Yeah.
I'm such a fan of those, and man,
Both the art books, yeah, yeah,
it's such a cool thing to talk to you because I feel like I don't really know you, and I feel like we known each other for years, and
yeah.
there's a certain
I'm very easy to talk to, Jason. You'll find this. Matt will explain this as well.
I feel like I should just confide everything to you.
Yeah.
I have this strong feeling that we're going to come back to it. We're going to
Yep.
have a lot of rebirth in animation. There's going
Mhm.
to be another renaissance. I'm very excited about the future. I think people are going to like have their minds bent once they see Ultraman
Yep.
and they see Transformers, and not everything has to be Spider-Verse.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
that's cool. Like I'm all about that. Anything
Yeah. It's
you
done a
could
lot
do
of
to
good
have
for
a
us. Yeah.
new feel, a new texture,
Yep.
a new dynamic for do it, because people want to see different stuff.
Mhm.
And at first maybe people will be like, that's ugly,
Mhm.
and then let it sit with them, let it resonate, and
Yeah.
they'll be like, oh my god, that's actually super interesting.
Well done. Yeah.
There's a lot of new stuff being told here.
Mhm.
So have a new perspective and a point of view. I think that's so important. I love that,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, I think also it's one of these things that you talk about, like the ease of talk, but it's like a thing where I've now discovered, I've been doing this long enough now, but like, you get caught up in the stuff about, oh, what brush do you use? What pencil do you use?
Yeah,
But the thing that I think has evolved, and when I talked to Lon Lanning about this, and he was, really encompassing the things I was talking about, is that it's like, I think I tried to get to the root of what makes people want to be artists and what is the human element in the room. We talk about the human, the person behind the artwork, and I think that's more important sometimes than
it is.
like here's the pencil to buy, here's the brush pack to buy. No, no, no. Like, what do you want to create? What speaks to you down in your soul when you look at the backyard, at the tree in your backyard? What does that encourage you to make in the world? Like, that's
Yeah,
the stuff that I want students to take away from this. Is that because some people get caught up in like they're bearing their soul to the industry and getting so burnt out in it. But it's like you really have to connect with you as a person, as an artist. You'll go work for people, sure, but you should always be creating for you. The thing that
yes,
comes back to the base is that you should be making the things you want to make. You take your jobs, you take your money, you do your job really well, you make connections and friendships, but then at the end of the day, you come back and you make things for yourself. That's the
that's
biggest
right.
takeaway you have to really have in this industry. So,
Yeah, and you'll still want to do, and you learn on that process. Like Yamamoto for me
mhm,
was my training grounds, and in a way, like I've done a lot of the same work that I was doing in professional setting before.
yeah,
It was like a lot of it's like a lot of the similar story aesthetics, a lot of similar thinking
mhm,
dynamics, and everything was sort of there already, and
yeah,
sort of pre almost ordained or predestined.
mhm,
And I love that. I love when that kind of moment happens. It's like, oh my god, I've been here before. I
yeah,
kind of get this already, and you understand what to do. And I love what you just said about how you're giving people those same that those pieces and those tidbits of yourself,
mhm,
and people can see that and they know that you love it. And if you see someone, I'm a firm believer in this. If you see a piece and you could tell someone had fun when they were creating it,
mhm,
whether it's a story moment or a character or an object, that piece is so much more pleasing to look at. You could sit there and stare at it for hours and study it because you're like, look, that person, there was so much fun in that, and it could have been created in a few minutes. It could have been created over a course of a couple days or months or years, but it's something people will marvel over forever. You know,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's one of these things why I have like artwork in my studio that's not just like it's all concept art. Like I have paintings by guys like Chris Guest, who's a London painter. Like because like I like people who express on canvas. I think it's really
yes,
important as well with brushwork, like the way people just touch paper with a brush, like that is part of you extending through the brush into the paper. Like, and
that's right.
it's something that I think you can bring to your work as a entertainment designer, what I really call people like us, but traditional artists, the guys who really like who make no money, who really sometimes live on the streets and have nothing to their name, who then pick up a canvas and bare their soul onto a piece of A4. Like it's powerful stuff, and I think that's the stuff you have to draw from outside of the industry because you've got your Ian McCaig's, you've got your Scott Robertsons, but then you want to try and bring that unique vision, and that's what makes your voice so unique, and why it's where
Yes,
you really bring your style into things where people can see, oh, I see your influence of this here and the influence of this artist, but I've never really seen like this color palette or like this brushwork. Where does this come from? Like, and then you can dive deeper into, well, this painter, this artist, this charcoal guy that I know. Like those are the things that then when you produce stuff at like portfolio reviews, people will be like, holy shit. And if they've never seen it before, they'll instantly jump into it, be like, I need to hire this guy, I need to hire this now. Look at this stuff, it's incredible. So that's the more important thing is like bringing your voice to the table versus like
very
trying to,
much.
because I mean, like Feng just took portfolio reviews at IMAG in Paris, and every single one was little person, big building, little person, big building. And it was like, where is the storytelling? Where is the mechanics of what you're doing? Like, where is your voice in your work? Like, what, because ArtStation for so long was just a copy paste thing for many, many years, people making the
Yeah,
same stuff over and over again.
yes,
I just talked about this with a couple of guys, and they were saying the same thing about how it's almost kind of poisoned the industry in a sense from people, younger people now that are coming through school. You know what I mean? And then you respond, Jason.
yeah. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about what you said because
Yeah, it's a
there's
lot. It's a lot to take in. Yeah, it's the
no. I
whole thing
mean,
of yeah.
I do portfolio reviews on a weekly basis, and
Mhm.
I do see that where there's moments, and I'm like, I had a pause there because I was thinking
Mhm.
about what you said about Fang.
Yeah,
Um, I recently listened to one of his talks he did on YouTube, and I
the
think he
AI
was
one.
talking about the AI. Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
and he's right. It's there's a lot of things that we do when we're getting closer, sort of quarters in a medium shot,
yeah.
where
Mhm.
that's where you see the real thinking.
Yeah.
I don't think it's bad that you show scale in a piece.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of the opposite of Fang. Like I like seeing pieces like that in a
Right.
portfolio.
Yeah.
Scale is not easy to do. To do a
Mm-hmm.
big establishing shot and make it look correct, where all
Yeah.
the textures are in the right place and all the scales and proportions and perspective are in the right place,
Mm-hmm.
and you're making the atmosphere feel correct and all that stuff. That's
Mm-hmm.
a very masterful thing to do. It goes back to the old Hudson River School master painters,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and so, and Bierstadt and all those amazing painters from the classical days.
Yeah.
That stuff is hard, but
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
a harder thing for me to do is tell a story in
Yes.
image. And, if you're telling a story of like two people in a confrontation
Mm-hmm.
without showing that they're in a confrontation,
Yeah.
that's the tension that you want to
Body
create.
language, facial expression. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of that is crafted through composition. A lot of it is done through lighting. A lot of
Yeah.
it is
Sure.
doing by placing objects inside of a scene and creating a metaphor with all those
Lighting.
objects in the scene.
Yeah. One's red, one's blue. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Have
No,
you
I
seen?
think it was. Mhm.
Sorry, what?
No, I was going to say, I think the thing with Feng as well is that he was trying to say was that those things are great, but it's not the whole piece. It's not the whole thing that, like, that's not the,
No.
because I think
Yes.
the job of concept design has been muddled. And the fact that people think that's all you do as a concept designer, it's a lot of those blue sky pieces versus like a gun or a
Yes.
piece of armor or something like a character turnaround. Like, how do we build these things in 3D, or how do they function? How does it reload? Like that stuff that you have to figure out early
Yes.
and
The
then put into
breakdowns.
production. Yeah.
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 And we do that in animation. We call it sequence design.
Yeah.
And what we do is like, say, for example, we do these high level paintings.
Mhm.
That's like the blue sky point of it.
Yeah.
And we go, hey, this is where, the main character is. This is the space. This is texturally lit this way. And
Mhm.
you start creating maps around those big blue skies.
Yeah.
And then you show that to the director, make sure all the scale's feeling right. Then you do a
Mhm.
rough build. A lot of my
Mhm.
art department people are digital art department. They can
Mhm.
paint and draw. They can do 3D models.
Right.
So we'll rough stuff out in 3D, get the visual sort of scale of everything. It doesn't have to be finished.
Yeah.
Just boxes and cubes in the beginning.
Mhm.
Show it to the director. They love the scale. You get real lenses in there with your scout, doing your previs.
Mhm.
And I talk with my cinematographer on my movie a lot, where we're
Mhm.
actually like, hey, this feels right. Maybe this, counter feels too low, or this dwarf doesn't feel tall enough. And if you're, in a world where things are stretched or proportions are sort of elaborated, you have to build around that. So there's so many, backs and forths and sort of little digestive pieces that you need to know. Now, if I'm doing work for myself and
Mhm.
I want to just have fun, I'm all good about just landscape painting.
Yeah.
That's sort of like me going like at the end of the day, just kind of
Yeah.
like I want to just do a lighting exercise on some rocks, or
Uh-huh.
But if you want me to
With
get
that
into
latest piece I shared
gritty,
recently, you done a little of the painting of the forest. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and if you want to get down into the nitty gritty of it, I can. Like I
Yeah.
can get down and design a mech. I can,
Mhm.
I can do hard surface design as well. I do organic design, and I think that I don't put a lot of that stuff in my book. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because you said something that you hit the nail right on the head. I don't want to be hired for that.
Yeah.
If someone brings me in to do like a whole industrial like warehouse, I wouldn't be
Yeah.
happy. I'd be like, okay, I'll do it.
Mhm.
It'll look awesome. I'll make it as amazing as I possibly can. But there's a dude that does that out there every single day, and that's their bread and butter. Hire that
Yep.
guy.
Yeah.
If you want me to do like a samurai tale, I'm
Mhm.
down. Or if you
Yeah.
want me to do Transformers and make a new world out of something and create something totally unique in a landscape around Cybertron,
Yeah.
I'm down. Like I love world building. So
Yeah.
I think I like the greater challenge, and I think that people will see that in your work if you inject that into yourself.
Yes.
But breaking things down into small shapes from a bigger world, that's the crafting, that's the world building, that's the Tolkien, that's the Game of Thrones thinking, and I think that's super amazing. And I just feel like there's so much more story to tell and worlds to create out there. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a good point to end on there, Jason, I think we've kind of hit the nail on the head, is that, do what you love, and then you'll get to do what you love. That's the thing, is that you'll just, indeed.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Indeed. So for anybody who stuck around to this point, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah.
It's been a great talk. I hope you've enjoyed it, Jason, and thank you for coming on.
Gordy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time today as well and reaching out to me. If you ever want to chat in the future, I'm always down for like a part 2 or part 3. I always like doing that with friends, and please invite me back. I'd love to chat with you more.
Yeah, grand. Thank you very much, Jason.
Awesome.
It's an honor to have you on. So, Yeah, so again, if you guys have stuck to this point, you can check out Jason's work at the links below. I'll leave all his stuff in the description if you want to reach out or even check out what he's doing. Again, Transformers will be coming out at one point very soon, so check that out also. And of course, Blue Eyed Samurai that he's worked on previously. A lot of awesome stuff that Jason has touched throughout the last couple of years. And yeah, thanks again to you guys for listening. Thanks for Jason coming on again, and we'll see you all later. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.